My name is Dean Radin. I'm the Chief Scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. One of the things that we do at this institute is study experiences that people report, very commonly, that challenge the prevailing scientific idea about who and what we are. And so these experiences range from simple intuition, like gut feelings, to psychic phenomena, to mystical experience. We're interested then in when somebody has a transformative experience of this type, and there's a pretty large range of them, and we also gain some sense that the experiences that they have are real and not just an illusion, then how do we begin to understand them? Most of what we do in the scientific sense is in the laboratory. We use methods like high-density EEG to look at brain activity. We use psychophysiological methods to look at how the brain and body are related to each other. We use methods in physics, methods in computer science, and statistics. So the magic I'm talking about, first of all, is not Harry Potter, and it's not Harry Houdini. Those are both fictional magic. I'm talking about the real stuff. So real magic consists of three categories. The first category we can call divination. So it's the idea that your mind can perceive through space and time. From a materialistic point of view, we don't know how that can happen very easily. From an idealistic point of view, it has to happen. It is the way things are. The second category I call force of will, which from a scientific perspective, we might use terms like mind-matter interaction or psychokinetic effects. And that's the notion that your intention, your will can manifest. It makes things happen. The third category is theurgy. In practice, it's about evoking spirits in ceremonial magic where you try to get spirits to do things on your behalf. So the reason I got interested in magic is because for most of my career, I've been studying parapsychological phenomena, telepathy and clairvoyance and so on. And after studying the esoteric literature, even just for a little bit, I realized that what we have been studying in the laboratory is exactly what people have called traditional magic. Divination is clairvoyance and precognition. Force of will is psychokinetic effects. Theurgy are phenomena like near-death experiences and mediumship. So because I was surprised at having spent almost 40 years studying these phenomena and not realizing that that is what traditional magic is about, I decided to write this book to express essentially what I discovered, which to other people might seem, well, of course that is the way it is. How did you not even know that? Part of it is because I went through the academic tradition, where we assume that a certain view of the world, and in that view of the world, ideas of traditional magic are laughable. It cannot be the case. A lot of people who are attracted to magic in the first place, they don't care how it works. They don't even care about the debate over whether it exists. They just want to use it. So the two simple forms that have been used as far back as we can see in history, one is called writing magic, and the other is called sigil magic. So these are very elementary practices, but both of them have persisted throughout history, probably because they do something. So from a psychological perspective, you can say, well, the act of writing down what you want, that will just psychologically predispose you to seeing that happening. But the question is whether it actually does cause the world to be different. So that's kind of what we study in the laboratory. Not so far these magical practices, but things like that, where you make very strong intention and then you see whether it changes something in the world. Sigil magic is like writing magic, except that instead of writing something down, you make a symbol for the stand for the thing that you want. Once you have that shape, the symbol itself will remind you of the intention. You use whatever method is necessary in order to put all of your intention into that symbol and like push through the symbol to make it happen. And then, as is seen in the laboratory a lot, that there's something called the release of effort effect. That while you're pushing like crazy with your intention, nothing's going to happen. It happens when you release. So the sigil magic as well, you push really hard through the symbol, and then you might burn it, you might put it away in a drawer, you get rid of it somehow, so that you allow the intention to go do whatever it's going to do. So in the popular sense, this notion is sometimes thought of as you create your own reality, that your ideas will manifest. That's where the idea of affirmations comes from. and to some extent positive psychology. You can trace that line of thought all the way back to shamanism. It is part of the esoteric tradition. So then somebody could say, well, then how come if I want to have world peace tomorrow, I'm thinking about it, it's not happening. So what am I doing wrong? Or I want to have a big pile of gold. I don't see it, so that model must be wrong. My interpretation of that is that the conscious level mind where this is happening, this is not where the action happens. All of the action happens at a much deeper level of mind. It's a little bit like looking at an iceberg. The tip of the iceberg, you can see it. That's their conscious awareness, but the most of it, by far, is below the surface. And that's where the action happens. So one of the reasons why I wish for a gold Mercedes and it doesn't show up is because we have lots of unconscious things that are working against us. We know that we have self-defeating behaviors. Otherwise, we wouldn't see levels of obesity that we have, and people wouldn't drink and smoke as much as they do. So you may consciously say, I'm not going to eat this cookie because it's not good for me, but you will find your hand going to get the cookie, and then it'll pick up the cookie and it'll bring it to your mouth and you will eat it. It's part of your unconscious that can override your conscious awareness. So this is one of the reasons why meditation as a practice is useful not only for mental and physical health, but is essential when it comes to things like magical practice. In the magical traditions, what a yogi might call samadhi, which is these very deep levels of mystical unity, a magician will call gnosis. And all of the magical traditions say that for magic to work, you have to do it from the level of gnosis. Well, most people don't go there. It's not easy to get there because the world is constantly pulling our attention away, but that's what's necessary. Consciousness is so obvious that for many people, they don't even know what you're talking about. Most academics, and this is now true everywhere in the world, are taught according to principles that have developed within Western science. That scientific worldview is based on a philosophical set of assumptions known as materialism. So materialism, in a nutshell, means that everything is made out of matter and energy, including mind, including consciousness, including everything we know about subjectivity. That's the prevailing view. So if you're challenging that view, you have the same problem that you would in any domain where you start challenging the status quo. The status quo doesn't like to be challenged, so it will push hard against anything that challenges it and attempt to squash it. This is the problem of materialism. Materialism doesn't know what to do with consciousness, so it sort of sets it aside. We'll worry about that later. Or it comes up with the idea that somehow the brain is complex enough that it gives rise to experience, even though nobody has any idea how that could possibly be. And we know that materialism is pretty good because it gives us the technology to do this sort of an interview with a special machine that captures my image and so on. So we don't want to throw materialism away. It's too good. The question is it good enough to account for everything? And here's where we have the problem. Clearly, it is not accounting for all of the experiences that people talk about. So what's missing? When you look at the esoteric traditions, you immediately bump up against what might be thought of as proto-science. So alchemy, astrology, and herbalism. Alchemy was the forerunner of chemistry, astrology is the forerunner of astronomy to some extent, and herbalism is the forerunner of pharmaceuticals. What's interesting is that historically, that all three of those proto-sciences also had a fourth element in it, the element of consciousness. So the practitioner of alchemy or the practitioner of astrology or herbalism knew that their intention was a very important component of what they were doing. This is true in each case. And yet science has stripped that out. You don't consider when you take a pill that your intention is important, except maybe as a placebo. But certainly when you're preparing something like metals or in chemistry, people don't think about that. But that was part of the original idea. And so I think what we're happening now is that science is slowly beginning to mature to the point where it sees that the intention and consciousness of the scientist is as important an ingredient as it was in alchemy and astrology and so on. So I looked in detail at the esoteric traditions, all the way back from shamanism to Pythagoras, Eastern traditions, all the way up to the present time. And you find that there's a similar thread of thought. And basically they're saying that a better model of reality is idealism. that everything is made out of mind, including matter. That solves at one stroke, if that method is correct, if that assumption is correct. It solves all of the puzzles about psychic phenomena and mysticism and all of that stuff. So now consciousness came here first. And so the challenge, the scientific challenge is, how do we get from pure awareness to emerge into space and time and matter and energy? How do we do that? Well, there are lots of people working on that very problem. How do you emerge out of something that seems non-physical into physicality? Some scientists who strongly resist this are of the opinion that we basically understand how reality works. There's a couple of things left over to mop up, but we kind of got it. I think that view is so arrogant. And even just from a historical perspective, you see about every 20 years, some prominent scientist saying, well, it's all wrapped up. We just have these one or two things left to fix, and then we got it all. It's just stupid from my perspective. The science is young, and we have far more things that we don't understand fundamentally at all than we do understand a little bit. And that's one of the fears that arises then. You say, well, I've spent my entire career as a professor professing certain ideas about the way things work, and you're coming to me and saying, actually, you didn't understand that at all. Well, that's frightening. I mean, no one wants to think that they don't know what's going on. This is one of the reasons why the Institute of Noetic Sciences is a private, nonprofit institution, because we're looking at things that do challenge the status quo. You can't do this in the academic world. We were among the first to support research on meditation, research on the positive psychological and health consequences of things like gratefulness and forgiveness, the mind-body connections and health, and so on. We were supporting these kinds of ideas at a time when they were considered laughable and extremely risky. So if somebody wants to live a comfortable life, the easiest thing to do is to go along with the flow, always. And if someone has a family and they have children to support and all that, it is actually the responsible thing for the sake of the rest of the family to not challenge the status quo. We live in a society that is constantly pushing certain ways to be. And among other things, we are not taught to think for ourselves or to think critically or to question our own motives and our unconscious desires. It requires taking risk. But so what? Life is a risk. And we never actually know. We hope we're getting closer to understanding it. But I sometimes suspect that as humans, we don't have the capacity to actually understand what's going on. And I see this reflected a little bit when you have a mystic who can go into mystical states. They come back with a conviction that, I understand it now, I got it. And say, well, tell me, what is it? And the response is, it's ineffable. I cannot describe it. And the reason is that that language at the everyday level is not capable of describing what's actually going on. Some mystics will say that they come out of the mystical state and then they see the world in a new way, and everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. The ancient notion of Indra's net is this necklace with lots of glittering pieces of crystal in it. And so each one is the universe, but all the facets on it are reflecting all of the others. So you have this amazing network of awareness, which is seeing itself reflected again and again and again in an infinite number of ways. So it's sort of simmering at some universal unconscious level, trying to wake up from a dream, and when finally whatever we are understands it, or it understands itself, it wakes up and the dream is over. I see it as you go along in your daily life, you are a certain way, and then one day you wake up. And from that moment, everything before that seems like a dream. And you can wake up multiple times. So in my life, I remember two instances where just walking to class in college one day in the morning, I woke up. I mean, it was a very strange experience, a little bit like you're sleeping, and now you wake up and you become aware. There was a step function while walking to class one morning that everything before that I felt as though I was sleeping, and that this has happened twice. So I'm imagining that there are many things that can push that kind of experience. The more awake you are, And the less dreaming you are, I think the closer to enlightenment you get.